We all good? All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Great to be with you, Sanjay.
Yeah, really appreciate it. What are you in Atlanta for?
Yeah, so we're doing a CEO listening tour. So we're listening to drug developers and companies tell us what they think the FDA can do better.
Do you enjoy those types of tours?
Yeah, I thought it would be a little bit of diplomacy, get to know people, but I'm actually getting very specific suggestions on things we can fix at the FDA. And there's no shortage of things that are broken to fix at the FDA.
When I want to talk a little bit about your background, but how do you approach that? Do you come in with some sort of idea of how you want to fix things, and then you're using the CEOs to sort of layer that in, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, I want to make sure it's a very user-friendly process. So the user interfaces are broken. They're from the 1960s and 70s. I want to modernize the agency. So a lot of what we do is along that theme of modernizing the process. Why does it take 10 to 12 years for a new drug to come to market?
Why does it? Because I think sometimes the conceit is, look, these are important things. They should take a while before a drug is approved in this country. You want the gold standard evidence that other countries even look at to determine their own drug approval process. Should it be streamlined? Is there a risk in that?
Well, first of all, you have to keep the same high standards of safety, because that's our number one job. But when an application sits on a desk for 3 months, you're not increasing the safety evaluation by just adding time. There's so much idle time. For example, after a preclinical study, the company reapplies then for a phase 1 trial. Then they reapply for a phase 2. Then they reapply for phase 3, and then they do a final NDA. You wouldn't apply for college after each year. So we can run more continuous trials using modern technology to have eyes on the endpoints of a trial in real time. Our regulators look on. And we have a lot of offices. It's a bureaucracy, and the applications get farmed out when we could use our convening power to bring people together in a tumor board style meeting. That's something that we're starting. And so we can get decisions out in our new program in weeks, which is unprecedented at the FDA.
By the way, I should point out that we're both surgeons.
That's right.
And it's interesting because I'm curious. I think my surgical training has influenced my reporting, and I think just how I think about the world. Tumor board's a good example. The idea of collecting people who are smart and can get to some sort of consensus that's actually useful. How about you? How does your surgical training help you?
Yeah, I relate to that. And I know you and I both have done emergency surgery, not just complex surgery. And you have to make a decision with the information available. You have to make decisions. And I think there's so much you can take from that to the real world. You can pontificate and go in decision paralysis in any business or organization around any decision. But I think that surgical training says, okay, we have enough information here to move to the next step. So I love being a surgeon.
You took care of patients one at a time, and now you're a public health official now. Individual care versus care for the masses. And this comes up with things like vaccines and FDA approvals for medications. How do you balance individualism with public health?
Well, look, I got disillusioned in medical school after 3 years and kind of left and drifted over to graduate school for public health. And I've often thought we're not addressing some of the big ironies in health. That is, we don't talk about root causes. We see massive problems expand right in front of our eyes. A generation now on ADHD meds, and a generation of kids now with sperm counts 50% of what they were a century ago. The age of puberty going down each year by a week and a half. What's going on? We don't really pause and ask, what's the root cause here? So one thing I love about the FDA is we get to focus on food, and healthier food for children is a massive priority. You saw our action to remove the 9 petroleum-based food dyes. We're now at the next level of chemicals. We had one of the largest food makers, Tyson, remove titanium dioxide. Mars Company did the same. They're getting rid of all high fructose corn syrup, Tyson Food is, and BHT, which is a preservative. So we're starting to see some moves in the food supply. Because look, our obesity problem in children, which is rampant, it's not a willpower problem. It's not their fault. This is something we are doing to kids.
There's a problem with regard to obesity and diabetes and, frankly, overall health. We're a country that spends $4.5 trillion on healthcare, and frankly, we don't have much to show for that. But at the same time, how do you like, how do you pinpoint then food dyes as sort of being the culprit? Makes sense, sort of, I guess, intuitively, but from an FDA commissioner standpoint, acting on evidence, how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, look, there's 1,000 ingredients in the U.S. food supply, chemicals that don't appear in the food supply of Europe. So getting rid of any one is not going to make our population significantly healthier. But there is a randomized controlled trial that found that these petroleum-based food dyes are associated with ADHD. We don't otherwise have a good explanation. And there are natural, cost-neutral alternatives. The FDA went ahead and approved, in my 5 months that I've been there, about 5 months, we've approved 4 natural ingredients with natural elements for food dyes in lieu of the petroleum-based dyes. We're going to approve 2 more. Normally, the FDA approves 1 every several years. We approved 4. So we want people to enjoy whatever they enjoy, but if we can just take small steps towards healthier ingredients, then I think it's a win.
It seems like they've tried removing food dyes in the past, or at least curtailing them to some extent, and they found that people really didn't buy those products. Their Fruit Loops, I guess, weren't bright enough or cheery enough. Right. I remember when Michael Bloomberg did this thing with sodas in New York, and people accused him of sort of propagating the nanny state. Is that a valid criticism? I mean, I hear what you're saying. I have kids. I think about this stuff all the time. But at the same time, where do you draw the line in terms of, hey, we have the evidence to act now versus we think, and as a result of our thinking, we're going to take something away from people?
Yeah, it's a balance. Look, you're always trying to keep a balance. But you're absolutely right. The vibrant colors of the food dyes make the food more attractive, and studies have shown that it actually messes with the mind of a developing child to the point where they can be attracted to the food even though they're already full. And that may in part be what's behind some of this rise in insulin resistance. So we shouldn't be messing with the minds just to sell more products of children. There's a huge tide in the United States that says this makes sense. Republican, Democrat, independent moms showed up in high numbers to vote over this MAHA agenda. They believe in it. The companies see the writing on the wall and are already making moves to use natural ingredients. We just want to set a level playing field and a common time frame so that one company doesn't have an advantage over another company.
I've listened to a few of your interviews, and you've made this point, I think, a few times that, look, here is where the country is sort of headed, whether it be with food dyes, the MAHA movement, vaccines, Tylenol, whatever it might be. Like, for example, with COVID vaccines, I think you've said that a significant percentage of healthcare professionals have not received the COVID booster. When you hear that, what does that mean to you? Is that an opportunity to follow or to potentially lead? Because look, healthcare professionals aren't necessarily the barometer of everything that should be doing. I mean, there was low flu vaccination rates. When you hear a stat like that, what goes through your mind?
Well, look, U.S. healthcare workers in their decision to get the COVID booster last year are really in line with the rest of the world. The rest of the world has moved on to a risk stratified approach. But the United States last year, for example, was an international outlier pushing COVID boosters in every single age group, regardless of whether or not a 12-year-old's entirely healthy and had the infection in the past or not. And I think it came from this very paternalistic approach that the public, they're like infants. You could overwhelm them with information. We just have to tell them what to do. We don't want to give them too much information. They might get confused, and somebody may choose not to get the vaccine because now we're talking about natural immunity. You had a great question. I remember it was epic, where you asked Dr. Fauci, hey, somebody just recovered from COVID. Do they really need another COVID shot? And I remember he didn't answer your question. We never got the answer, but the administration's policy at the time was to ignore natural immunity. I think that's the sort of stuff that results in a loss of public trust. The studies have caught up with the issue, of course, and have found that natural immunity is at least as effective as vaccinated immunity, which can be transient. And rather than go down the road of take a shot every 3 months to maximize the transient 3-month protection, a lot of people are saying, hey, it's the common cold, the emergency's over, we're In France, you have to be 80 to get the COVID shot.
Does
for
that make
high
sense
risk.
to you? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it probably does make so. There's probably some threshold there. 75 in the UK.
What is the concern that it's not safe? Like, so I'm 55. I'm a healthy guy. I got my COVID shots. Should I get a booster or no?
What number was that then for you? 7?
Nah, I don't. Our hospital was mandating it, so I can't keep track of the numbers. But I think it was 3 or 4 for sure.
I mean, look,
Would you get it
No, I did not get the COVID booster shot.
because you're concerned about safety, or why?
I don't need it. I don't feel like I need it.
Did you get a flu shot?
I do generally get the flu shot, but the flu efficacy, as you know, ranges from single digits some years to 40-some% at best.
But this idea that if you're healthy, you don't need it. I mean, most people are healthy that get vaccines, right? I mean, it's to prevent you from getting sick.
But the problem is it really does not prevent you from getting sick. If you're healthy, what's preventing you is the fact that you've got cellular immunity and you're healthy and you can withstand a common cold.
If you've had it in the past, you're saying, and you have natural immunity. And that's probably most people now, which is, I think, the point that you've made.
Yeah, probably 99.9%.
Your thinking has evolved, though, right? Because in the beginning of the pandemic, when there wasn't obviously a lot of natural immunity and pretty significant strains, your thought was what at that time versus now?
Yeah, there was low population immunity, and I felt that high-risk individuals should get the COVID vaccine.
I do want to take a moment to address a couple things here. While the COVID-19 vaccine is definitely important for people who are high risk, whether that is due to age or underlying conditions, there is evidence that it can be beneficial for younger and healthier people. Take a look at this. A recent presentation from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, showed that the risk of COVID-19 hospitalization does rise for people with underlying medical conditions. That's not a surprise. But at the same time, 2 out of 5 children hospitalized over the past few years did not have one of these conditions. Okay, back to the conversation.
This idea that we don't want to be too paternalistic, I get that, and we don't want to make it too confusing for people. Does the risk stratification make it too confusing? How do you explain it then to somebody? 70%, I think, of the country has some sort of pre-existing condition, that's kids included, that might put them at higher risk for COVID. So do they, if you count things like asthma, obesity, diabetes, a lot of the things that could potentially put them at higher risk for getting sick, should they get a COVID shot or no?
Look, I think the risk-benefit ratio is fluid and changes with each individual based on their comorbid conditions, their background, their age, their health status, right?
Yeah.
A healthy person is not a healthy person.
Not a lot of healthy people around, like totally healthy
take,
people.
For example, Novak Djokovic was not allowed to come to the United States because he did not get vaccinated. That was the Biden policy.
Yeah.
Has any professional athlete ever been hospitalized with COVID in the history of the world? No. But we had this absolutist, paternalistic approach that, look, if he's disobedient, someone else may be disobedient. Therefore, we have to have a universal crackdown. No one else in the world is doing this.
One more clarification here. We did find a few reports of professional athletes being hospitalized with COVID, including NFL player Dakota Dozier and Olympic swimmer Madison Wilson.
If someone does get sick, though, should they isolate? Should they stay at home, kids or adults included?
If you're sick, stay at home.
Mask?
Well, I mean, a cloth mask has no value. And
What about a good mask? What about a N95
Sure, yeah. If
mask?
they're going to be around other people wearing a high-quality mask, sure, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit just about your background. So you're a surgeon, a gastrointestinal, but primarily liver surgeon.
Pancreatic, biliary, surgical oncology.
How did you choose that particular area of medicine?
People have asked me that. It's not like I was born dreaming of the pancreas, thinking this would be an amazing organ.
What do they say about the pancreas? They say, and when you start as a surgical resident, eat when you can, sleep when you can, and never mess with the pancreas.
Never F with or mess with the pancreas. Yes, that's a motto all doctors know.
But you decided to dive right in.
Well, the pancreas, as you know, has no capsule. So it's like a piece of jello in the body. So it's very delicate to sew. So it's a specialized skill set. Now, I didn't dream of being a pancreatic surgeon, but I had a rare opportunity. My career has meandered because I'm just sort of intellectually curious. Went to graduate school for public health, was doing all kinds of research in different areas, including older Americans and frailty and all kinds of stuff. But then I had an opportunity at the last minute to do a fellowship with one of the biggest names in surgery in the world, Dr. John Cameron.
John Cameron wrote the book.
Yeah,
literally
wrote the
on this.
book.
Yeah.
You probably read the book. So I had an opportunity to work with him. He happened to specialize in the pancreas.
I see.
So then I said, I guess this is what I'm going to do.
And you did a laparoscopic Whipple procedure, and I didn't do general surgery, but I did know that the Whipple was the one of the most challenging procedures I think you do in general surgery, and you were able to do that with laparoscopes. How did that come about?
Yeah, it's an exciting technical challenge. Most people that have pancreatic cancer don't survive to 5 years. So if we can reduce the morbidity of the procedure by making it far less painful and far less debilitating, that's a big win. So technically, it was a tour de force. It was a challenge. We were able to master that procedure through a few small incisions, which is what you described as a laparoscopic approach. And then I went on to do the same for people where we did a pancreas islet transplant operation. We did it for chronic pancreatitis, but in hopes that it could be a procedure we could use later for diabetes.
Are you still operating? Are you still? Is that still part of your life? Or?
No, I hung it up. I was in the operating room the day before my Senate confirmation
that.
hearing,
Yeah.
and that might have been my last operation.
How's that feel? If you're not doing it now, are you ever planning on going back to it, or is that in the rearview mirror now?
I don't know. I'm so focused on what I'm doing now. Maybe I'll never go back to it. I do miss it. I miss it a lot. And look, to be honest, sometimes when I'm filling out, 5 government forms to do something, I think, gosh, I wish I were back in the operating room.
There's a lot of forms in medicine as well, as you
right.
well know. I just wondered about that. As you may know, I had considered the Surgeon General job some time ago, and then I found it quite ironic that the Surgeon General couldn't practice surgery anymore.
Was that the rule at the time?
Yeah, it still is. You could see half a day of clinic a week, but you couldn't operate. And I think it was a liability issue. I'm not sure, but anyways, it's just. But it's tough, right? You dedicated your whole life to being a surgeon, to caring for people in that environment. But it may be time to move on to something else.
This is so much bigger than anything I've done. The FDA regulates 20% of the U.S. economy, and we're involved in cosmetics and microwave ovens and MRI machines and mangoes coming across the border and medical devices and wearables and drugs and gene therapies. So it's such an exciting opportunity. I have a very clear goal. I want to see more of these cures and meaningful treatments out quickly, and I want to not cut a single corner on our safety evaluation.
Those two things, I think, can sometimes seem at odds with each other. And also, in the wake of all this, are these significant cuts that are happening across the government, but including the medical establishments. Do you have the resources you need to do what you want to do?
So first of all, it may sound like they're at odds, going fast and maintaining high safety standards. But if you think about a phase 3 clinical trial that runs for, say, 2 years, that's idle time. We should be doing our manufacturing inspections. We should be reviewing the lion's share of the application, reviewing the label, all the complicated stuff in the 100,000-page application that comes to the FDA for a drug. The clinical trial part is a piece of it that can read out at the end, and we can do our reviews during that idle time. So we can do much faster reviews without cutting corners on safety. And we said, we're going to create a new FDA where everything is centralized.
Do you feel like you have what you need now to do what you want to do?
Yes, but the task is massive, right? We're trying to follow research as it happens. We're looking in the pipeline of the drugs that are coming in saying, oh my gosh, this looks amazing. This could help people with an otherwise debilitating, hopeless condition. And the safety profile looks strong. Let's put it at the front of the line.
Let's talk about this past week with Tylenol and autism. First of all, how did that hit you? I know you guys have been talking about autism for some time, and the health secretary said that there was going to be a report in September issued about this. If you can, just take me a little bit behind the scenes for when did this start hitting your radar?
Yeah, so look, we had this charge from the president and the secretary to look into autism.
But what do you think is driving the increase in autism?
I don't know, but I think there are a couple plausible mechanisms. Number one, an autoimmune response that may be blocking the folate receptor at the blood-brain barrier. Number two, some degree of mitochondrial dysfunction that may interact with the same pathway or a different pathway. And number three, alterations in the microbiome. Maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. Maybe it's multiple. I think it's probably multiple mechanisms. I'd love to know what you think. You've thought about this a lot, and you're a neurosurgeon.
What about the fact that we look at the entire spectrum differently? How much of, there's a lot more kids who now would be diagnosed based on the changing criteria on the spectrum. How much of a role do you think that plays?
I think that's some of it. But you don't see people in their 60s and 70s with these repetitive tics and the sort of nonstop kind of motions that you see with the severe autism children today, the individuals who are completely nonverbal from birth. You just don't see that in a generation ago like you do today. And look, there is a full range, and there may be many factors. You look at kids today get no natural light exposure. And some of the days in school, they might have less natural light exposure than an inmate in a federal penitentiary. Maybe circadian rhythms play a role. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there. But the autoimmune response to the folate receptor is a very interesting mechanism. And we felt like when we had at least talked to enough experts that felt that this is worth sharing with the public, we said, let's go ahead and share this with the public ahead of any report. And leucovorin bypasses that blocked receptor and may be a therapy that some doctors may choose to use. There's a group of doctors in the United States, I don't know if you've spoken with any of them, who have reported some pretty impressive clinical results using leucovorin in individuals who test positive for that folate receptor antibody.
And it's about, 60% or so of children who have a diagnosis will test positive?
Yes, and maybe 20% overall may see a marked improvement with leucovorin. The rest may have some improvement, but not as significant.
You're talking about a B vitamin that is reduced to the point where it can bypass that potentially blocked, if you will, receptor.
That's right. It's methylated, so it can go past the receptor pathway to get it through.
So this brings up this point again of evidence threshold.
Yeah.
Do you treat something like leucovorin differently because we're talking about autism, something that doesn't really have a therapy? Will it go through FDA approvals and more quickly than other things?
I think because it's safe, it will go through a different process. And because it's been around for nearly a century, it will go through a different process. And because of the urgency of the unmet public health need of the burden of autism in society and the incredible experience that clinicians have. Now, as you know, NIH, as a part of the announcement, announced $50 million in funding to study this question more. Maybe a couple randomized controlled trials will find the effect size is small. Maybe it'll find that it's large. But that's a question that we'll see answered. Maybe there's a subgroup that benefits more from the therapy.
Do vaccines cause autism, do you think?
I don't think so.
It seems like it's a big sort of rallying cry of this administration. You've got a health secretary who has said this flat out. He has said there's no vaccine that is safe and effective. He believes vaccines cause autism.
Well, I think there's no medicine that's 1,000% safe. And I think we have to remember that with everything. I think the absolutism around some of this stuff creates mistrust. And when we say they're 1,000% safe and it's impossible for there to be a single complication of a vaccine, that's the kind of rhetoric, I think, that doesn't resonate well. So I think we have to be humble and take a very honest approach.
If you're hearing from the health secretary that there is no safe and effective vaccine, that he's drawing these links between vaccines and autism, you're saying that you don't believe that's the case. But if that's the message that gets out there, could you potentially be scaring people away from something that could really be helpful for them?
Yeah, look, I think if the media misconstrues what he's saying, yes, it could unfortunately scare people.
Can I call you Marty?
Yeah, please.
Marty, I don't think he said it.
So he's also said, how do you reconcile that with the fact that he said the best way to prevent measles is through vaccination?
I feel like he was forced into that one because he was in the middle of an outbreak.
Well, that's a theory of yours, but to only report piece of what he's saying.
All right. I don't have it. We should follow up on that discussion for an entire podcast. But I do want to talk about this Tylenol thing, though. So you're up there, you're hearing the president say, don't take Tylenol. Nobody should take Tylenol. That was weird to me. First of all, the fact that it was the president saying that. But you've said, I agree with you, that we shouldn't be speaking in such absolutes. And yet the commander-in-chief did exactly that.
Not really. You're making it an absolute. He said there are exceptions. 3 times he said it in the same speech. And he said it's between you and your doctor. So that part has been left out of the coverage of what he said.
Let me jump in for a moment to say that we did take a close look at President Trump's speech on September 22nd that we're talking about here.
Thank you very much.
In that speech, the president said, quote, taking Tylenol is not good. And also, quote, ideally, you don't take it at all.
Because I think you shouldn't take it.
In fact, the president used the phrase, don't take it, don't take Tylenol, at least 10 times. However, yes, the president did caveat this a few times, saying pregnant women could take it when medically necessary and should consult with their doctors for more information.
That you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that. It's a small number of cases, I think. But if you can't tough it out, if you can't do it, that's what you're going to have to do. You'll take a Tylenol, but it'll be very sparingly. It can be something that's very dangerous to the woman's health. In other words, a fever that's very, very dangerous, and ideally a doctor's decision, because I think you shouldn't take it, and you shouldn't take it during the entire pregnancy.
Okay, back to the conversation.
And look, take it up with the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health, who believes there is a causal association between prenatal acetaminophen and autism.
Did he say that? There's
He
a
said
causal or an association?
He said there is I'm going to quote exactly what he said. There is a causal association between prenatal acetaminophen and the neurodevelopmental disorders of ADHD and autism spectrum disorder.
What is a causal association? Because I always thought there's associations.
Yeah.
And then there's cause and effect.
Yeah, cause and effect. He thinks the acetaminophen is causing those. Now, look, he may not be right. I don't know.
I don't think he said that, though. I think
He said that.
But in the rest of that quote, he said there's a plausible causation. But but from what I read, he said that there may be an association between Tylenol and autism.
I'll get you the quote. He said a lot of things.
To clarify, we went straight to the source, Dr. Andrea Baccarelli, the dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And here is the statement that was sent to us. This is currently linked on the White House website as of this week. And Dr. Baccarelli says in part, as we noted in our review, animal studies have independently suggested that prenatal exposure to acetaminophen can adversely affect the developing brain. This biological evidence lends support to the possibility of a causal relationship between prenatal acetaminophen exposure and neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism. So, the possibility of a causal relationship in animals. To be clear, overall, experts say that there are multiple causes of autism, and the science showing a connection between autism and Tylenol is not at all settled. Back to the conversation.
I think my job as a regulator is to say, and we did this, I don't know if you saw the letter the FDA sent out. We said there has been an association described. Other studies have found no association. We're simply including this information for you to think about minimizing the use of acetaminophen for routine low-grade fevers. And obviously, there's a safety track record with acetaminophen compared to other alternatives. So we put out a very measured
I saw that
statement.
I thought it was very measured.
Thank you.
I did think it was a little bit at odds with what the president was saying. But again, maybe this is you're suggesting maybe that's being misconstrued.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, if you don't cover the fact that he said that there are exceptions, which he said 3 times, and you don't cover the fact that he said it's between you and your doctor, it is going to seem at odds.
But when you're up there listening to him, there's not a part of you saying, hey, look, maybe we should dial this down a little bit, or were you totally okay with how he presented it?
Look, so we're the physicians. We are the physician community, and so we're going to put out what we think are the measured recommendations. If an individual who's not a physician says something, it's okay. It's a free country. How many patients have you met that have different ideas on what caused their illness or what they should do differently, even though you might not agree with it?
Yeah.
And so people are welcome to the questions that, for example, Secretary Kennedy are asking about health and root causes are the questions most moms are asking.
Yeah.
And so we could say that's crazy. Don't listen to it. We can't hear that. That can't be in the public domain. Or we can try to use data as best as we can, as we did with the Tylenol letter, to say, here's what the data says.
And I think the advice from the measured letter from the FDA is in line with what I think large organizations like American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, it's what they've been saying, right? You should use the lowest dose for the shortest amount of time, defining what a fever is, talking about the risks of not treating it. It's that guidance was already out there. Has the guidance changed, do you think, as a result of all this?
Well, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology had said to try to avoid acetaminophen use in pregnancy. But recently, because they are highly political, came out and said, it's 100% safe in pregnancy. Well, that's not what they said in the past. Again, there's a lot of different ideas on this. The dean of the Harvard School of Public Health feels strongly about a causal relationship with his public statement. It's on the record. How many patients have we taken care of in the hospital, Sanjay, where you get a call from the nurse and they say, your patient had a low-grade fever. I went ahead and treated it with Tylenol. And you're thinking, why? What are we doing? You're not actually treating the illness. You're just treating a symptom. If the symptom doesn't bother the individual, all we're doing is exposing that individual to another drug. And so maybe the broader message is that we don't need to treat every low-grade fever willy-nilly. You know, a study out of Johns Hopkins, my former institution, found that if you treat in a group of kids with chickenpox illness, if you treat their fevers, it prolongs the duration of illness. And that may be because the fever is the body's natural way of trying to rid the infection.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I read a study as well with regard to pain and inflammation. I don't know if you saw, that came out of Nature, and basically showed that people who had the lowest levels of inflammation at the time of injury were the most likely to have chronic pain. And yet most of what we do, whether it be medications or just even rest, ice, compress, elevate sort of protocols, is to decrease inflammation, thus increasing pains. And some of these things, I guess, are a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to reading your book. I think you have a book on pain.
Yeah. I'll get you a copy.
You know, it's amazing how little we know about pain. So that's why I'm dying to read it, because you have the same nerve impingement on MRIs on a bunch of kids, and only some of them have pain with the exact same finding.
That is one of the keys, I think, because again, going back to this absolutism, we can start to get more specific in terms of delineating these demographics. Like certain things work really well for people when it comes to pain, and they don't work at all for other demographics, and we haven't quite figured that out. But I'd love to get your thoughts. We got a few minutes. So mifepristone, what is happening with this? There was a letter that went out to 22 Republican attorney generals. I guess that was in response to a letter they had sent you?
Yeah, they'd sent a letter. People have concerns about an Ethics and Public Policy Institute study that was done that shows a higher complication rate than the complication rate that has been described using self-reported data. And so they have asked for sort of a look at this. And so we have an ongoing effort to look at mifepristone.
Now, if you're not familiar, mifepristone is one of the drugs used in medication abortion and miscarriage care. In the letter sent by the 22 Republican attorneys general to the FDA, they cited a report from the Ethics and Public Policy Center as evidence that mifepristone is risky. Now, what is the Ethics and Public Policy Center? Well, it's a think tank that describes itself as, quote, pushing back against the extreme progressive agenda while building a consensus for conservatives. Their report, not a medical study, was authored by two of the organization's leaders, who are not doctors or medical researchers, and this was published on their own website, not in a peer-reviewed health journal. Experts we spoke to about the report said, among other shortcomings, it lacked transparency with respect to the source of the data and is not a methodologically rigorous, evidence-based resource. Okay, back to the conversation.
We look at the reports that come in. We have adverse event reporting systems, and we do our own studies. So we have to do it, and I want to do it for every single drug that's approved by the FDA, not just one or two here and there, not just vaccines and mifepristone. We should have eyes on a drug immediately after it's approved. So we're going to have a new system to use big data, because as you know, you can pull together electronic health record data now that protects privacy anonymizes the patient so it's de-identified, and watch how the drugs are working in big data. That's one of our big projects.
Is there a point where you say, "Hey, look, it's good, it's safe"? Mifepristone, 25 years, I think, roughly 2000, I think it was approved. You have lots of data. I mean, are you suggesting it has not been evaluated along the way, and there might be something new that's of potential concern?
Well, again, I think people get very interested in this idea that we can rest assured that something is 1,000% safe. And the reality is no drug is 1,000% safe. So we're going to continue to look. For example, we could discover in our ongoing analysis of mifepristone that there's a drug-drug interaction that we were not aware of. If we find that, we're going to let people know.
So is there ever a point where you say something is good? I mean, it's
approved. It's approved.
It's approved.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but the reevaluation of something that's been approved, that's been out there for a long time, seems like it's a little bit of a waste of resources, considering all the other things you want to do.
Well, we want to do it for every single drug. And so we're going to have big data analysis.
4,000 drugs?
We're going to start with the drugs from last year and the year before. It's about 100 drugs. Now, this year, we may hit a record number of drug approvals. We're working very hard, and we may very well hit that target. But the drugs this year and last year and the year before, we're starting with that group. And so we can do this at scale. Now, we have a charge from Congress to review the application pharmaceutical companies send to us to decide whether or not the claims they want to make about a drug are consistent with the data they submit. That's our job. And so if safe and effective is generally the standard, and then we approve a drug.
How do you sort of balance what I think is a culture and a scientific sort of inflection? Abortion's a big issue. I'm sure that was prompting the letter from those attorneys general. Is that something that you consider? Is this a culturally driven thing versus a scientifically driven thing?
Well, we're doing it for all drugs.
I know, right. So eventually you're going to get to that point. Mifepristone, I guess, is in the news right now, but you get a letter like that, automatically sort of start this review?
Like I said, it's been an ongoing review. It's actually been required as a part of a regulation called the REMS that we are required to do a continuous review on that particular drug. It was set up, I think, in the Obama administration. So it's part of an ongoing review.
What is 7-OH?
7-OH is an opioid that appears in trace amounts in the kratom leaf. That's not our focus, but in concentrated amounts in powders and drinks and gummies under the name hydroxymetragenine. 7-OH is the broader term, and it can be extremely powerful. It's an opioid. It's been off the radar. Nobody knew what it was. It just sort of hit our country a few years ago. It's sold in many vape stores in the United States.
Is it something you vape, or can you take it in other ways?
You take it in other ways. It's eaten. Pills is probably one of the most common forms, but it's in drinks and gummies and other foods as well. And there's no FDA-approved gummy or supplement that includes 7-OH. And 7-OH, it's not legal, but it has not been a controlled substance, even though it's an opioid, because it's been off the radar. So we initiated a process to begin scheduling 7-OH as a controlled substance by the DEA.
What is your general thoughts just on vaping? I think when it first started to come out, it was sort of pitched as an effective smoking cessation tool.
Yes.
People smoking, instead of smoking, vape, that'll help you get off that.
Yeah, that's right. And it is.
So where do you stand on this? I mean, because you get a lot of kids who are starting to potentially use these products that may have never started smoking. They may start vaping and then transition even to cigarettes.
Well, I think that's the key that you just touched on, and that is it's not just used for transitioning from combustible cigarettes, but young people are starting vaping from scratch, often with illegal Chinese vaping products, which can be the majority of the products sold in some of the vape stores. You go in there, you'll see fruity flavored, cutesy fruit flavored vaping products. None of those are legal. None of those are approved by the FDA. You'll see vape products with THC. Could be up to a third of those vape products are being used with THC. None of those are approved by the FDA. So I do worry about teenagers and kids even younger starting on these products from scratch and starting on illegal products. We are going to continue to approve legal vape products that are nicotine delivery devices for people who are transitioning from combustible cigarettes, where we know the technology, we know what chemicals are being delivered in those devices. But the vast majority of what's being sold are illegal products that are designed to get kids addictive, including having a video game or Bluetooth music listening device in the vaping product.
Right.
These are banned in China. They don't allow Chinese kids to use them, but China is making them and sending them to the United States.
The data is good enough, though, you think, around its effectiveness as a smoking cessation tool?
It's less dangerous than combustible cigarettes. That's pretty clear.
Do people stop smoking cigarettes and because they have access to vaping?
My understanding is there are reductions in cigarette smoking because of the availability of legal vape products. If you look at rates of smoking globally over the last 5-10 years, we are seeing significant reductions, not enough. But there is a view in the medical community that these devices can help further reduce the use of combustible cigarettes.
I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
Which I think you've said that, I mean, this is a big deal for you. My understanding is this may be one of the things you'd like to leave as a legacy in terms of your time at FDA. And just share a quick personal story. My mom recently had an L1 compression fracture.
I'm sorry to hear.
Very significant, and tough 80-year-old, just nothing stops her. That stopped her. And she's doing great. She got a kyphoplasty. But one of the things her doctor said to her at that time was the lack of HRT, hormone replacement therapy, may have been a contributing factor to the fact that she had such low bone density and was more at risk for fractures. We went through this period after the Women's Health Initiative study where basically it became sort of really limited, if not completely abolished in some practices, to even give hormone replacement therapy. Where do we stand now, and what is the best guidance, do you think?
Well, it is tragic. Look, women live longer and feel better on hormone replacement therapy when started before age 60, is around perimenopause. And people think of hormone therapy as a way to alleviate the symptoms of perimenopause, the night sweats, hot flashes, mood swings, waking. But it does so much more on a long-term health basis. The long-term health benefits are unbelievable, including bones being so much stronger. The risk of fractures goes down between 35 and 50%. These are New England Journal studies. So it prevents osteoporosis. And as you know, my mom had the same thing. She's had 2 different falls, minor, but it's disability. When somebody becomes non-ambulatory, at later in life, that can often trigger a spiral of things that can lead to some disability, minor or major. It's expensive. It's healthcare utilization. It adds other risks if you have a hip replacement.
I mean, I think what she had heard at the time when she was considering hormone replacement therapy is that there were negatives. It would increase the risk of breast cancer, not be necessarily protective when it came to heart disease. She was really worried about breast cancer. Were those legitimate concerns? Were they overstated?
No clinical trial has ever found that hormone therapy started before age 60 increases the risk of breast cancer mortality.
I'm embarrassed to ask, how did that become a thing then?
It became a thing because in 2002, some researchers who wanted to show that it causes breast cancer announced it to the media before they published it in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And that little gap of time allowed everyone in the world to be so scared when you're talking about something as sensitive as breast cancer, that women flushed their pills down the toilet and doctors called their patients and said, stop taking this. There's been a study from the NIH with researchers from Harvard and all these big brands. Turns out it was a few people that really wanted to find this association. And when you read the article, it turns out days later, there was no statistically significant increase in breast cancer. There was a numerical increase, but no statistically significant increase. That's why we run statistics. That's the scientific process. That's a big issue. And no difference in breast cancer mortality, which is what matters, right? Or do you have an increased chance of dying of breast cancer? It's really a tragedy. It's maybe one of the greatest screw-ups of modern medicine. It's resulted in 50 million women being denied this incredible therapy. The number one cause of death in women is heart disease, as you know. It reduces the risk of fatal heart attacks by 25 to 50%. I mean, that's more than statins. It reduces cognitive decline. All different studies have shown somewhere between 30% and 64% reduction in the cognitive decline women experience later in life. Estrogen has a magical protective effect. It has some interaction with neurons. And in one study, it reduced the risk of Alzheimer's, something I know you're interested in, by 35%. So we have these billion-dollar Alzheimer's drugs. We don't talk about replacing the body's natural estrogen with estrogen when the body stops making it.
Why? And maybe this doesn't have an answer, but why did that happen? Like, who benefited from telling people not to do something? I'm a pretty simple guy, Marty. Like, I search for new cars on my computer, and then I get a bunch of ads for new cars.
Yeah,
makes sense. They're trying to sell me something. Where is the impetus to get people not to do something, not to take hormones?
Entire careers were built on this hypothesis, and they were dead set on proving it. The lead author of that famous 2002 study that was misrepresented said prior in a medical journal, and this is published, we have to stop the hormone replacement therapy bandwagon. Well, you didn't have the data yet. He didn't even do the study yet. He was on a mission.
For his own academic credentials?
I guess. I mean, this was the largest study ever done in the United States in U.S. history. $1 billion NIH-funded study with sites all over the country. And so when the results didn't give them exactly what they wanted to see, they kind of spun it. And that press conference was a famous press conference I wrote about, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this topic is you see the deception and subsequent dogma of doctors. To this day, 7 out of 10 primary care doctors, when you ask about hormone therapy, will say, ooh, I worry about that breast cancer risk.
I just heard that the other day when I was talking to, this whole situation with my mom. It's kind of remarkable in 2025.
So the FDA responded to the bandwagon thinking at the time by putting black box warnings on estrogen, topical and systemic estrogen, saying, warning, breast cancer. So we had an expert panel at the FDA. It's an amazing panel. I think every woman should watch this panel, at the FDA expert panel on HRT. And we are in serious discussions now about what to do about the black box warning. And I think you'll hear something very soon on it.
About 200 days now, I think, in the job. What has surprised you the most?
That you can get stuff done. It's amazing. You can actually get stuff done. In the past, it was, hey, the agency runs itself, the centers, we run ourselves, and, enjoy your receptions and press conferences and little things like that we allow you to do. We have created an incredible sense of teamwork. We have new leadership across the board, and we're working together. The lines between the centers of what they cover have been kind of gerrymandered. So this drug goes here, gene therapy goes here, and biologics goes in CBER, but biosimilars goes in CDER, and monoclonal antibodies goes in CDER. It makes no sense whatsoever. The companies, it's really hurt innovation. China and Australia are moving faster than us now on phase 1 clinical trials. We got to win that business back by modernizing our process, running continuous trials, getting decisions out quickly. We're creating new incentive programs within the agency. I'm making an effort to increase the pay of our scientists and reviewers and inspectors. We have a big inspectorate. I'd say the biggest surprise I've had, two, is one, you can actually get stuff done, and two, the collegiality I've had with Dr. Mehmet Oz and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya so that he can spin up some research dollars for NIH funding on a topic. We can look at therapeutics, and Oz can talk about payment reform in that space. And we do that all the time. One of the big areas we're doing it in right now are drugs. This is a big priority for me. Drugs that reduce downstream healthcare utilization. If a drug reduces the number of insulin shots a kid needs, or a drug reduces the number of dialysis sessions that you need, put that at the front of the line. I mean, we keep throwing good money after bad into our expensive healthcare system, and we're not getting healthier. So we're focused on drugs that reduce downstream healthcare utilization.
Are there a couple things you point to over the last couple hundred days where you say, we got these things done, these are the things I'm most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, we got the first national conversation in 23 years on hormone replacement therapy. We removed 9 petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply. We got Tyson's, one of the largest food makers, to remove the next tier of chemicals, titanium dioxide, BHT, and even high fructose corn syrup. We're going to keep going. We have taken action on 7-OH. We're addressing illegal Chinese vape importation. We have inspectors at the border at the FDA. We have a law enforcement division. We have a new pilot program to get drugs decisions out in weeks, and we're going to do that for PTSD drugs and other drugs where there's a large unmet public health need. And our effort to reduce animal testing. We're eliminating animal testing requirements for many drugs where, quite honestly, computational modeling can do just as good or better of a job.
How do you stay healthy? Mentally and physically.
Well, that's sort of based on the assumption I am healthy. But thank you.
You look good.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I feel good.
Are you what, mid-50s?
Yeah, I'm mid-50s, and I'm feeling good.
What do you like? How's your diet? Eating a lot of beef tallow, or did you cut back on that?
Yeah, it's funny. People magically think if I have fries with beef tallow, I'll be healthy. Look, my wife cooks almost every meal. She's an amazing cook. She cooks things with phenomenal grains sometimes from farms with great farming techniques and have rich soil. And so not grains where they strip the fiber and chop it up and it functions like sugar. During the day, I have a lot of nuts. My team, some of whom are here, know I have a batch of coconut nuts with some coconut sugar on the nuts, and that'll be lunch. I'll drink juice in the morning. And, we do our best. In a job like this, you're running around the country. I'm trying to be transparent, talking to a lot of people. I'll take any question from anybody. I've done a lot of interviews. People need to know, and the industry needs to know exactly what we're thinking in terms of how we regulate digital health devices. I don't want the FDA to be a black box. So we're constantly out there and meeting with people. So it does make it hard to work out. But I do try to work out. Sometimes it's relegated to just being a weekend warrior, I got to be honest.
Because you're busy.
Yeah.
I see you're looking at your team. They're trying to encourage you to work out more. Is that?
Maybe they're looking at my gut here thinking, But we got one guy here, Sam, who can do 100 pull-ups and 50 push-ups in 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
That's impressive.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, Sam is
Mad Dog, could you do that?
Guy.
Okay.
I tried it. I did 2.5 pull-ups, then took a rest for 10 minutes, and then did 2 more half push-ups. And then I can do the push-ups part.
I mean, you got a health secretary who's going to put you to the test, I think, right?
He's healthier than I am.
He's a pretty healthy guy.
Yeah.
What is your guilty pleasure? Do you have a guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. I mean, I love laying on the couch watching NFL football, and I do that at every opportunity. And people call saying, "I know you're extremely busy," and on Sunday, that's where I'll be.
Got it. Well, look, one thing I wanted to say, I read your opening statement. I heard your opening statement, and you talked a lot about your father in that statement. It struck me, and maybe I don't want to suggest I was reading too much into that, but how much of an influence, because his father, my understanding, was a pharmacist.
Yeah.
So you're a medical family. How much of who you are today was influenced by your dad?
100%. I mean, amazing guy. How many docs have we met in our careers that are 1,000% selfless? Didn't matter if their patient had a problem on their day on call or they were off call or, they get paid to go in or they would pay to go in. It didn't matter, right? It's just incredibly selfless. And so my dad is just one of those docs. And so it's a beautiful thing when you're growing up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania. And my dad, who took care of people with leukemia and lymphoma and blood disorders, would have somebody come up to him in the grocery store and just give him a big hug and look at me in tears and say, we owe everything. He walked us through this journey for 15 years. And so it's just such a powerful thing. How can you not have this incredible respect for this sort of ancient treatment of all people with equality mindset that the medical profession has espoused? There's a great quote that who else knows about the value of human life than the witnesses of birth and death. And in medicine, we see that all the time. And you see the common equality. A spleen is a spleen. It doesn't matter who the person is. And I think there's a lens of the medical profession that is so refreshing. And I think we have to constantly talk about it because we live in a very polarized and even partisan society. And I think people need to turn off the echo chambers of social media and realize we all want the same thing. We want a healthier population, healthier kids. We don't want to see 40% of our nation's kids sad because they have a chronic disease. We don't want to drug our nation's kids at scale. We want to talk about root causes and the environment and food as medicine and the microbiome, gut health and the soul. And these are topics that traditional medicine has pushed to the side. And so there's a movement now to say, let's talk more holistically about health. And you've done a lot of that.
I've tried to, and I mean, I think that is who most humans are, right? We don't want to take any medicines if we don't need to. We don't want to have surgery if we don't need it. The idea of having a more holistic approach to things. I'm being told to wind up here, but do you foresee a time when things aren't so political? And I say that as somebody who's done this sort of work for 25 years. It's particularly weird right now. Is it going to get better?
I hope so. Look, I was raising a flag in the air over the last 4 years of COVID, saying, let's be objective. You normally evolve your position as the data comes in if you're being objective. That's what we do in medicine. And the idea of digging into a position, we saw that cross over into how people saw their health. And, I still see it today. I see it, the science is clear and the science is... No, the science is a process of asking questions and a healthy discourse among experts. And that, I think, is something we need to restore. Unfortunately, I think it's the same old doctors that are curated for so many scientific questions, and these are highly partisan individuals. I'd like to see more civil discourse, people that have different opinions. Let's talk about your ideas. Maybe you're right. Maybe the data here is compelling. Maybe it's not compelling. If we show more humility, I think we can win over some more public trust.
Well, we're counting on you, Doc.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much,
Hey, and
Sanjay.
thanks. Look, public service. I have great admiration for public servants. It's not easy. I mean, just in terms of the time, but also all the different players and the people that you're accountable to. It's a lot of work, and I have great admiration for it.
Well, thanks. We almost got you to come in and work in government at one point. I understand.
Yeah, I would have done it too, except I have great admiration for public servants. I wish that I could have continued to practice surgery. It's tough, 7 years of training, and then I was told I would have to retrain if I was out of the job for 4 years.
It's a lot to give up.
It's a lot to give up.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Here we are.
Thanks again.
Great to see you.
Appreciate
Thanks so
it.
much, Sanjay.
Thank you.